Welcome to Dhaka Tribune Presents Straight Talk. I'm Dhaka Tribune editor Zafar Sobhan, and I'm joined in conversation this evening by Barrister Rashna Imam, advocate of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. Welcome to the show, Rashna.
Hi, Zafar. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Great. And the reason I wanted you on the show today is, the subject of the hour for the last 2 weeks has really dominated discussion here in Bangladesh is rape, with the coming to light of this horrific incident in Noakhali, which has really got everyone talking. There have been a lot of protests. Now, I have been part of many discussions, as you have probably been as well, and we've talked a lot about, rape culture. We've talked about, the attitudes and assumptions in society which underpin what is happening in terms of misogyny, patriarchy. But what I wanted to talk about today with you, specifically being a lawyer, is the legal framework of rape. So why don't we talk about that a little, the laws which govern rape in Bangladesh, where they may have shortcomings, how they might need to be reformed. So I'm going to over to you, Rashna. Why don't you sort of talk the viewing audience through a little bit of what a woman really has to go through, or a man, I suppose, if they are the victim of rape or sexual assault in Bangladesh. And maybe that would be a really good way of shedding a little light on the subject for our viewers.
Thank you, Zafar. A very good question, actually. So when we talk about rape and the quest for justice of a rape victim, so the journey really starts from the commission of the offense, and then it goes on till she secures a conviction.
Yes.
So this entire journey is fraught with what I would call nothing short of traumatic experiences for the victim. And when I say entire journey, I mean almost every step of the way is fraught with these experiences. And
Yes.
There are many reasons behind it, not just one. But today we are going to talk about the legal reasons behind it. What are
That's
the laws in place? What are the procedures in place? What sort of institutional framework do we have in place which deals with rape offenses? And where are they falling behind or falling short? So if we could start at the very beginning, the first step, which is one of the biggest hurdles, which is more of a social hurdle, it is actually to come forward and file a complaint. And as you correctly point out, and we've had numerous conversations, we've all had numerous conversations on the social reasons or the social repercussions of coming out, which is one of the main reasons why they don't come out and file a complaint. So I'm not going to go into that, but to put it in a line. The social repercussions include being judged, being harassed, being blamed. And when I say being blamed, what was the type of, what clothing was she wearing at the time of the offense? Why was she there? It was very late at night. What was she doing there? What is her character like otherwise? Does she have many boyfriends? Does she sleep around? So these become very relevant. And she obviously doesn't want to be subjected to these judgments.
Right, and there's a stigma associated, and oftentimes a lot of the lack of support actually comes from the family or the people who are close to the victim, that they don't really support the victim in the way which one would hope that they would support. So yeah, absolutely. In a very basic level, we see a lot. At a very basic
level. And as you said, family pressure also plays a big role, because a lot of these offenses are actually committed by people who are known to the victim, either family members or friends. So that's where family and peer pressure comes into place. And that's what stops them from coming forward. But there is one point that I would like to stress before I actually move on to the next stage in her quest for justice, which would be filing the complaint at the police station. And that point is victim blaming. And where does this come from? I'm not going to go into the sociological. I'm not a sociologist, but let me illustrate this point, how this is almost institutionalized in Bangladesh. And if you're not already aware, this would be shocking and an eye-opener for you, as it was for me.
Okay, please say,
Curriculum Textbook Board, the NCTB. The NCTB has approved a home science book, which is compulsory, a subject that is compulsory for all female students at every school, government schools. So chapter 7 of the home science book is on self-defense. And I am quoting, I'm literally translating and quoting. It says that you cannot and you should not wear attractive clothing.
Yeah, I see.
So this is what girls at a very young age are being exposed to, that if you do wear attractive clothing, you're responsible for what happens to you. So is she likely
and this is a school
textbook? That is objectionable at many levels. And NCTB has been served with a legal notice as well. And I believe they have probably taken steps to remove this. But this is everywhere. And home science starts at a very early stage. And
it's very indicative of course, of the mindset. You see, the fact that, it's great that they're taking steps to remove it, but the fact that it was in the book in the first place, and no one thought that there was anything objectionable to the content, through the many layers of editing it must have gone through. Absolutely. It really tells a great story.
Mindset, it also reinforces that mindset.
Of course.
Especially when girls of that age, an impressionable age, are exposed to that. So moving on from that, if they do face all of that social stigma and come forward, they gather the courage to come forward and actually file a complaint. The question we need to ask ourselves is, is the atmosphere in our police stations conducive to them coming forward and filing a complaint? Or what are the barriers that they're facing in police stations? So let's start with one, which would be getting raped a second time. This is not unheard of, and this is not uncommon.
Right. Police stations are not safe places.
Absolutely.
Necessarily. Yeah.
And it's pretty much common knowledge. So that is one reason why they would hesitate and think twice before actually going to a police station. And then moving forward, delay in reporting. There is a lot of reluctance on the part of the police to file reports. And especially if the perpetrators or the accused are politically connected, politically powerful, so on and so forth. So there's delay in reporting, which is where she faces harassment. And let's not forget that this is a rape victim. She is already going through trauma. She's absolutely traumatized. So to be able to want to face that is another reason why they probably don't go to the police station. Moving on, are the police stations and the police officers, do they know how to treat victims of sexual offenses? We have actually an 18 directives from the High Court Division of the Supreme Court. This was a case filed by a number of NGOs, and it led to 18 directives on how to treat victims of sexual assault and rape. Unfortunately, we have not seen implementation of that. And just to give you an example of what these directives are like, it mandates the presence of a female constable, and it mandates the police stations to actually take the victim and hand over the victim to a female constable so that the victim and the victim's family, they feel comfortable. But we don't see that happening. And
I was going to ask, is one of the problems is there's not enough female police officers, female constables. There need to be more. How about, I think in some countries they also have female police stations or institutions which are set up solely for this purpose. Is that something which may be some kind of a solution here in Bangladesh?
No, absolutely. In fact, that is the only solution to make a female victim feel comfortable.
Right,
I mean, our political parties have a certain percentage has to be women. So why don't we have that in our police stations?
That's a great idea, yeah.
So I think that, because having just one female officer may not be sufficient. You need multiple, because there is that problem that the female constable herself may not be entirely safe if it's just one female in a police station full of males. So she might not actually do something if the victim is getting raped a second time. So that's why we need to have female constables in numbers. So another problem, which is, say, when indigenous women have been victims of rape or sexual offenses, they're not always, they don't know the Bengali language. So translation services is particularly important when we're talking about indigenous women. So
Sure,
that
of
needs
course.
to be there because it's a huge barrier to actually filing a complaint when you don't know the language.
No
And
question. Yeah.
then, of course, the law is to be blamed for this. The Hijra community suffers tremendously. I mean, they're mocked out of a police station if they come up with a complaint. And honestly, under the law, as the penal code has defined rape, a Hijra cannot be raped. Only a
Yeah.
woman can be raped under the penal code. So the definition
Right.
of rape in the penal code is archaic, outdated, and to say the least. I'm going to go into
Right.
that after a bit.
Yeah, we'll come to that. Yeah.
These are the barriers, broadly speaking, in a police station that a victim has to face. So moving on to the investigation stage
Yeah.
and say medical examination of the victim. So this is where, again, many have been subjected to sexual assault for a second time at the hand of male medical officers. So we
Sure.
need more female medical officers. That's one. And secondly, of course, we've all heard of the extremely degrading and unscientific two-finger test that they
Yeah,
were
which has no actual probative value, scientific value whatsoever.
absolutely. And it's not,
Yeah.
it's very degrading, very
Of
indecent,
course.
and it's subjecting her to further trauma. She's
No, of
already
course. I mean,
traumatized.
I can only imagine, for someone who has been already a victim. I mean, you can imagine, for that alone, not wanting to file a case. I mean, why would you want to put yourself through that
Absolutely,
again?
absolutely. And in particular, if the victim is a very young girl, her
Sure.
family will not be willing for
Yes.
her to go through a test like that because of
Yeah.
notions of virginity and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
this is another problem. Though legally we have resolved this issue, we have a high court judgment that has declared the two-finger test illegal, but implementation again is a problem. Has this judgment been disseminated to all the corners of Bangladesh? Is everyone aware of this? Are they actually following through? We have very little.
Yeah. Now and then, I'd like to
implementation.
talk a little bit about evidence. I saw just earlier today that there's a High Court judgment talking about that you don't need physical evidence. Because again, I think, one of the common misconceptions certainly the police have, and I think the layperson in Bangladesh has, is that you need physical evidence of some kind to make a case for rape, and that's absolutely not the case. Testimonial evidence from the victim in many countries, and certainly it should be the case here in Bangladesh, can be sufficient if a judge or a jury finds it persuasive. And oftentimes, especially if the person is coming to file the case, days or weeks afterwards, there will be no physical evidence.
Absolutely, absolutely, you're absolutely correct. There will be no physical evidence, and there's another evidentiary problem which is most of these offenses don't have eyewitnesses. So
Right.
the testimony of the victim is critical, and as you said, they don't immediately go and report to the police station for many social reasons, and also because of the atmosphere in police stations.
Yeah.
So there again, if the case is decided on the basis of physical evidence, then most of them won't end up in convictions, and then there'll be acquittals left, right, and center, and that is
Yeah.
not mandated by law.
Yeah.
So, moving on, Zafar, from the investigation or medical examination stage, if we now go to the trial stage, the trauma doesn't end here. So the trauma probably, if anything, it gets more aggravated at this stage. And why I say this is since we were speaking of evidence, and everyone has been talking about how character assassination is permissible under the Evidence Act of Bangladesh, especially Section 155(4) specifically allows the accused or the defense to assassinate the character of the
Okay, so
victim.
we don't have what in other countries is known as a rape shield law, which is that, the idea being that, a woman or a man's sexual history is of no probative value whatsoever in determining
Absolutely.
whether they consented on this particular occasion. And this is understood in many jurisdictions around the world, but it is not. Is it not understood in Bangladesh, or is it actually not the law here?
It is definitely not the law here, and it is also not understood in Bangladesh, Zafar. At least that's my opinion.
Sure.
The law is 1870, so it's archaic. It's a colonial hangover, to say the least. And
this is it. We're still dealing with laws from 150 years ago.
Absolutely, which has no connection with times, changing times whatsoever. And as you've correctly said, this is irrelevant. Her sexual history is absolutely irrelevant to whether or not there was consent in this particular place. But that is something that I think as a nation we still don't understand, and which is probably the reason why this law is still here, which is absolutely unacceptable, whichever way you look at it. It has no probative value, as you correctly said. So this needs to go, and this is a good reason why they're very hesitant in going to court. I mean, forget rape offenses. They're even in domestic violence.
Anyone who's bringing a case, their entire sexual history is open season. It's fair game. Absolutely. It's right up there to be poured over by the defense attorney and dredged up. Anything can and will be used.
Absolutely, and very little control is exercised by our courts in controlling the defense attorney's behavior or questioning style, which is another thing that really needs to be introduced. If this act is amended, then it has to be specifically stated in this section that the court cannot allow the defense attorney to go on, assassinating and vilifying the victim on the basis of a sexual history. So this is a major problem in the judicial process. And then, of course, one of the biggest problems is we have no victim and witness protection law in Bangladesh. None whatsoever. I mean, there are sections in the, Nari o Shishu Nijaton Domo 9, which specifically would sort of give a discretionary power to the tribunal to order safe custody or of the victim. But again, it's a discretionary power, and also it's not really implemented or enforced. I mean, there is no program in place to protect victims and witnesses. And this is a major problem, Zafar, because let's look at it this way. If it's a sexual offense, there are very few witnesses. More often than not, there are no eyewitnesses. If there is one or two, and they are constantly threatened and bullied and intimidated at the hands of the perpetrator or his family members, who more often than not come from fairly influential families in the locality.
The victim herself would be subject to this kind of
absolutely. So it's not just the witness, but more importantly, the victim and her family members.
And of course, this is the thing. I was part of a discussion just yesterday where the point was raised that rape is almost always should be understood as a crime of power and power differential in a person exercising power over someone who has less power than them. And so that being the case, if that's our understanding of rape, and I think it's a very neat way of encapsulating something which underpins almost all rapes, is that obviously then that person, once they file the case, they are still subject or vulnerable to this powerful person who abused them or raped them in the first place. And so we don't have any mechanism in place to protect them. It's absolutely, absolutely.
They're completely exposed. I mean, you need a safe shelter where you can protect victims of rape, where you can keep victims of rape throughout the trial process, and if necessary, beyond the trial process. And if not necessary, if the person is not on bail, if the accused is not on bail, then of course you can take her out of the shelter. But her identity, her location, the location of her family members, it's all out there for anyone to come in and threaten and intimidate. So more often than not, what happens is they end up withdrawing the complaint, withdrawing the case, and it never sees the light of day.
One of the things we see now, of course, in this day and age, is we see a lot of this character assassination has gone online.
Gone online, as in cyber, of course. This is added a new dimension to bullying.
Yes.
And of course, then there is leakages of video footages of the crime. So that is another looming threat, which sort of, and there could be images as well captured in a phone of the crime being committed. So these are good enough reasons for them to withdraw their complaint, even at that stage, even after they've filed a case. As I said earlier, every stage in her journey sort of gives her enough reasons to give up. Every stage of the way.
I mean, what is the conviction of, maybe you were coming to that, I mean, what is the conviction percentage after all of this? When someone actually, files a case, what are the chances that that person will find justice at the end of this ordeal which you have, you painted for us?
The conviction rates after the stats I have seen on this is very, very low, and for very obvious reasons. So even if you do go to trial, you withdraw because of the threats that you face, because there's no victim protection law. And another reason is that, say, if a particular tribunal before which the case was being tried felt sympathetic and did give a judgment convicting the perpetrator, what happens is that when this goes for appeal, the judges are bound by evidence on record. And if they don't see sufficient evidence on record, they're going to set aside the conviction. So a lot of convictions get set aside and they don't see, the light of the day. So very low conviction rate. And this is where we need to focus as well. There has to be some sort of accountability of these tribunals. I mean, the Nari Shishu Nijatan Damo 9 establishes tribunals. I think there are around 95 plus minus tribunals across Bangladesh. So how do we ensure accountability of these tribunals? Are they doing their job properly? So here, I think what makes a difference is there is a particular section in the Nari Shishu Nijatan Damo 9 which says that the tribunal has to complete hearing within 180 days. And if they cannot complete hearing within 180 days, then they have to jot down the reasons and send it to the Supreme Court. But having said that, there is a very vague provision which says that if the relevant authority is not satisfied with the reasons as to why they could not complete the trial on time, then the relevant authority will take action. But no further guidelines has been given in the law or through rules as to who is this authority, what sort of actions can be taken against that particular tribunal or whoever is responsible for the delay. Because it's really important that these trials are conducted within a tight timeline.
Of course, otherwise they'll just drag on forever. And the longer you drag it on, the more the danger to and vulnerability of the victim.
Absolutely. They'll be exposed for a longer time to threats and bullying.
You've done a really good job of, I think, outlining the obstacles and the current state of affairs as far as it is concerned with a rape victim and the hurdles and obstacles one has to face bringing a charge and seeing it through. So now maybe we could switch up and talk a little bit about what could the possible solutions be and why, and a lot of these things are fairly, it's not rocket science. It should be fairly obvious. There are a lot of draft laws in place. Why hasn't this come about? What are the obstacles insofar as you see them for changing things?
Zafar, as I said earlier, the laws that we need to reform includes the penal code, which is the definition of rape has to be reformed. It's completely archaic. It doesn't take into account, men. It doesn't take into account victims of different genders, say the Hijra community. So they have to be brought within the definition of rape. Also, another, not to get too technical, but see, penetration has not been defined. I mean,
there's this big issue whether it's penetration with a penis or with anything else. I mean,
absolutely, or with an object or an article. So that has to be brought within the definition. And of course, marital rape. I mean, that our law, the penal code, has carved out marital rape as an exception. That marital rape is not rape in the eye of law, even if it means raping a child bride.
Right.
So so far as the definition of penal code is concerned, that has to change. Moving on, we have identified some gaps in the Nari Shishu Nijatan Damo 9 in our discussion till now as to, a mechanism to monitor these tribunals and the progress of these tribunals. Are they actually effective in delivering justice to these rape victims? So maybe a monitoring committee needs to be formed with highest judicial officers heading the committee to actually govern these tribunals and monitor their progress. Moving on, the Evidence Act needs to change, of course. As we said, the character evidence exception 155.4, that needs to go. This cannot be...
And I presume all of these laws which need to be changed. Lawyers such as yourself, activists, must have been very vocal. And I believe there are a lot of draft laws in place. I believe there's a draft law in place about what you had spoken about in terms of witness and victim protection. What is holding back these reforms from taking place? We know what needs to be done. A lot of good work has actually been done, preparatory work, saying that these are what the laws ought to look like.
Absolutely.
And they just, for 10, 15, 20 years, they just sit there. What's going on? What are we missing here?
Zafar, to put it very simply in a few words, I think we lack the political will to start with.
Okay.
That is missing. And one evidence of that, a manifestation of that, is what just happened. That what just happened is death penalty is hardly a solution to this problem, as we all know only too well. I mean, research after research has shown that the death penalty is not a deterrent to start with. And not just that, what boggles the mind is that, while this may have lulled protesters who are ignorant about this, but it will actually cause more damage than good. I mean, the best case scenario is that it's not going to make a difference. That's the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario, much more likely, is a number of things. And one of those things is that this is going to increase the risk of homicide following rape. If I'm going to be hung, I'd rather kill the rape victim after raping her. Why would I leave?
I also think that it also decreases the possibilities of the police accepting cases. They'll say things like, especially if it's a family member or something, do you really want to do this? And there'll be a lot more pressure on victims to withdraw their cases, because and as someone has said, or many people have sort of made the same point, that really the problem is not the severity of sentence, it's the certainty of sentence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I think that really captures it very well. Yeah.
And it doesn't even take a lawyer to point out that it's the certainty of punishment, it's the accountability that will make the difference, and not how severe it's going to be. And of course,
I would have thought that really fixing this would, you say that there's a lack of political will, and it certainly seems as though that there would be, but it seems to me that it would be politically very popular. I mean, who would be against such reforms? What is the constituency saying that we want rape law to be governed by a colonial British era law of 150 years ago?
Well, I know it does boggle the mind as to why there is a lack of political will in this, but this really needs to be made a national priority. And it has not been made a national priority. What we have now is just giving everyone a false sense of security that something has been done to address the problem. If it were to be a national priority, then we would see that reflected in our policies, in our laws, and in other issues like gender-sensitive sensitization training of our police stations. The national curriculum textbooks should be amended.
I think that's very well stated. That it's very clear that this is in no way and by no means any kind of a priority. And I think
to point out, see why I say lack of political will. I mean, there is a coalition of around 17 NGOs, as you're aware of, who have been working on this for the last few years. I think since 2017 or 18. I mean, they have done extensive research. They have looked at the laws of all jurisdictions, and then they've come up with this 10-point demand. And it boggles the mind as to why not even one of those demands have been addressed. What should have been the least of our concerns, the severity of punishment, that has been addressed. And that too in a manner, as I said, that is likely to create more damage than do good.
That's right. I mean, as you said, at best it's not going to help. At worst, it could actually make things even worse. Yes.
Which is almost a certainty. And another thing that has been, completely left out of the equation, Zafar, is the victim. Yes. What changes have we brought about to rehabilitate the victim, to compensate the victim? I mean, one of the demands of the Rape Law Coalition is that there should be a fund set up, which would be controlled and regulated by a government for rehabilitation. I mean, we can't just completely leave her out of the equation because she is the offense that has been committed. The government is squarely responsible for this.
Sure.
Any
No,
government.
absolutely. It's a very logical demand, and it makes a lot of sense on a number of counts. I think we're going to have to leave it there, Rashna. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. I think you really put a lot of meat on the bone for our viewers, explaining the real legal framework which is surrounding this issue. And I'll conclude by saying I think you're absolutely right when you say it's clear that this is not any kind of a priority for us. And the only silver lining I can see of the, really sort of the horrendous incidents which are coming to light over the last couple of weeks is that a national conversation is starting. Maybe this is a national conversation which is long overdue, but I'm glad that we're having it. And hopefully in the weeks, months, and years to come, we will finally get the impetus to do something about it. Because as you say, this needs to be a priority, and it simply isn't, as far as I can tell.
Thank you very much, Zafar, for having me. And I certainly hope that this national conversation continues and we actually see some real reforms as opposed to, I believe one of the viewers just said, a Band-Aid solution.
Yes, I think that's a very nice way of putting it. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for tuning in. This has been Zafar Sobhan in conversation with Barrister Rashna Imam, and this has been Straight Talk. Thank you very much.